Final Fantasy XVI is a game full of symbolism, and this definitely includes its character designs. Today I want to sit down and analyze the fashion choices of all 8 of the dominants and talk about all of the hidden meanings cleverly imbued in their designs. I recently picked up the Final Fantasy XVI art book, and I was able to take a closer look at the character designs, and I have a lot to say about them. I'm trying to keep my analysis as spoiler-free as possible, but unfortunately there are some early-ish game spoilers that cannot be avoided whenever talking about this game in general, so tread lightly. Okay, so in 16 there are people titled as dominants, and they are able to summon icons. Previously, we have called them eidolons, espers, aeons, or just summons, but in 16 we call them icons. Instead of looking at this from a fashion history perspective that we normally do on the channel, I want to approach the dominant designs with a more symbolic lens and look at how their designs represent them as a person and connect with the story of the game. Before we begin, I just want to talk about how, as a longtime Final Fantasy fan, I was honestly really skeptical of Final Fantasy XVI at first, and I will admit I was a hater, but after actually experiencing the game myself, it really earned my respect, and I have gained quite an appreciation for its designs, and I honestly have a lot to say. If you also started off as a Final Fantasy XVI hater, or maybe you still feel that way, I would implore you to keep watching because I think there is a lot of interesting stuff to say about its characters, and I think they were designed with a lot of love and thought. First up is Ifrit's dominant Clive, the main character of our game pretty much. Early in the game, we see this design of Clive as a younger adult, a teenager, and it is quite a bit different from his older design. In his youth, Clive is training to be a knight pretty much, and we see him with a white overjacket and a red shirt underneath and some black elements. He has black pauldrons and black pants, some wrist guards, and then some general knightly metal garb going on. I feel like Clive's white overshirt tunic piece kind of represents his innocence and purity. He really wears his heart on his sleeve. He is a really caring guy. He is training to take care of his brother, who he loves so openly and so much. And I feel like this big element of white in his design right on his core shows that he is very youthful, very pure. He has really pure intentions. And underneath this white jacket, he has a red undershirt and red gloves and a little bit of red peeking out on his stomach area. While red also represents Rosaria, his home country, it is also kind of a message of what's to come for him. There's a little bit of red and fire tucked away inside of him that is going to come out eventually. Later on, we see Clive in an outfit when he was a soldier for the Imperial Army, but then a little bit later after that, he gets his full character design that we see for the rest of the game. So obviously, his dark red shirt represents his home of Rosaria, but also connects him to the element of fire. It also connects him to his father because these are clothing articles inherited from him. Clive has taken it upon himself to be the protector of his home and of the fire icon Phoenix, his brother. The color red that he's wearing is a very deep red and very similar to the banner of Rosaria, like we mentioned. Overall, I feel like Clive's design is deeply tied to that of duty and remembrance for his brother, who he has believed to be passed on, and his home, which has now fallen. Like we discussed, Clive used to wear white as a teenager, and this was probably representing his purity and innocence, which was later stripped away forcibly, and probably why we don't see much white in his adult design. The loss of his innocence and purity is reflected by his change of attire, which is now almost completely black and has a bit of red in the center now. The red in Clive's design is on his core and in the center of his body and near his heart, and I feel like this might represent how, despite losing everything about himself to darkness, his love for his family and his home will forever be inside of his heart and the spiritual center of his core. The core of Clive's being has always been his family and the fire of Ifrit, and this is reflected on wearing red in the center of his design. Now, you've probably noticed, but there is actually still a little bit of white left in Clive's design peeking out from under his red jacket. The white peeking out from underneath his red jacket is basically the last of his innocence and purity. Still there, but now heavily guarded. This, of course, represents the prevalence of his free will and determination throughout the story. I think it's also worth noting, and just like a fun little thing about the design, that the design of the icon Ifrit resembles that of like hot lava seeping out from around dark rocks, kind of volcanic. And Clive's outfit also shares this same kind of feeling of red peeking out behind a bunch of black armor elements. I feel like this is a pretty cool design choice that just successfully connects him with Ifrit really well. Next, we're going to be talking about Shiva's dominant, Jill. Just like with Clive, we also see Jill in her youth, and she is wearing a basically completely white dress with some blue-gray elements, and I feel like this also represents her innocence and her love. Jill is shown to be very caring and loving when she is a youth, and I feel like the blue elements show that she has some ice inside of her that is going to come out, and a little bit of a hint of who she really is. So many feel that Jill was unable to realize her full potential in the story, but personally, I disagree. Jill is naturally adverse to violence and basically shows that she despises needing to use her icon powers, especially after forcibly becoming a weapon to kill. Overall, Jill's design is very conservative and covered, and this ties in completely with her character. Jill has shown us time after time that she is not a fighter, but she does what she must. And her role in the story reflects this perfectly, honestly. I feel like she's always been a caretaker. She's always been a support system to Clive. So back to Jill's design, she is the dominant of ice, Shiva, and she is dressed in shades of blues, whites, and grays, and her hair is a really beautiful shade of blue-gray. Overall, Jill is a really tragic character. She lost her parents and her home at a very young age, and she was then adopted, but basically a political prisoner. And then she lost that family who she loved very much as well. She lost her new home, and she has also been a victim of slavery and abuse. Blue is a very common color used to represent sadness, which is a very prominent theme in Jill's narrative. I also really like Jill's layered skirt. She has a white underskirt with a little bit of a blue belt overskirt, and I feel like the general flow and design and cut is really reminiscent of Shiva's ice tendrils and frost aura. Jill's overall nature is also reflected in her choice of weapon. So instead of having a slashing weapon like a sword, she carries a rapier on her, which is more of a piercing weapon, and it is a weapon that can more effectively deliver finishing blows rather than having an intense sword fight. We only really see Jill fighting when she is protecting innocents like women and children, or to protect those that she loves like Joshua and Clive. Next up is Phoenix, the second dominant of fire, Joshua. The first time we meet Joshua is when he is a young child, and he is wearing completely white and red. And just like with Jill and Clive, the white in Joshua's design is definitely representing his purity. He is a very sweet boy, and he loves his family so much, and he is so committed to his duty, and he is very sensitive. And then on the outside, he is wearing a red tunic, and this definitely represents his connection to Phoenix and being the dominant of fire, and how it is paramount to his existence, according to his family, to fulfill his duties as Phoenix and protect his home. So at such a young age, he is wearing a very red outfit to represent that being Phoenix is basically what his life revolves around at this point, and he is less of Joshua and more existing as Phoenix. And then later on, Joshua's design as an adult changes very much, and he is wearing a lot less red now. And I think this shows that his life is no longer revolving around being Phoenix, and he doesn't have all these pressures put onto him from the world and his family, and he's kind of been off on his own, doing his own thing. He's still connected to fire, he's still connected to Phoenix, but it's just a more of a personal connection now and less of a duty that's been forced on an innocent child. And while being similar to Clive and wearing red, Joshua wears a brighter and more saturated color red than Clive does. And I think this is because Clive is a flame of destruction and power, while Joshua is a flame of life and rebirth. This brighter shade of red really represents a flame of new beginnings. The red scarves around his neck are frayed and flowy, and they bear a resemblance to the tendrils and feathers of the phoenix. Also representing Phoenix is the hints of blue in his designs, in his scarf, on the jewels around his waist, and on the wraps around his legs. This choice represents the hot blue flames that are mixed into Phoenix's feathers. Compared to some other characters like Clive, Joshua is wearing no armor elements and basically just a cloth adventurer's outfit, and I feel like this shows that he is a really peaceful character and he is just trying to do what he must, and he's not trying to get in any trouble. He's not trying to hurt anybody. He's definitely not trying to pose himself as a fighter. He's just trying to travel and find out whatever information that he can. Our fourth character is going to be Sid, the dominant of the icon Ramu. In general, Sid is a character very shrouded in mystery, especially in the early game. Sid is shown to have had his loyalties shifted before the events of the game, and I feel like this has allowed him to gain a lot of wisdom and have conviction in his own beliefs, and he is also much older than the other characters. He wears a leather jacket and matching trousers in this deep purple color, and if anything, I feel like this connects him to Ramu the most. In general, I feel as if his color palette of purple, blues, and grays and desaturated tones feels really stormy, which is befitting of the icon of lightning. Purple is also associated with royalty and wisdom. The biblical Israelite King Solomon is often depicted wearing purple, and there has actually been some real-world evidence that he actually did wear purple. I know I wasn't going to talk about fashion history in this video, but I can't help it. Anyways, it is a long-standing belief that purple is associated with wise leaders. The next character we're going to discuss is the dominant of the icon Bahamut, Dion. The main element of Dion's design is definitely his chainmail tabard, which really resembles dragon scales. While this connects him really well with Bahamut, I feel like the really interesting part of his design is what is under his chainmail. So Dion is wearing pretty much a completely white outfit, which of course connects him with Bahamut, along with the gray. This strong element of white in his design really represents the purity of his interests. Dion really has only showed ever wanting to be a good son and a loyal servant to his people. He serves his father on the battlefield, and it is basically the sole purpose of his life to protect his home. His whole life basically surrounds the concept of duty, and his own personal wants and needs are often sidelined to this. I feel like out of all the characters, Dion loves the most openly and intensely out of all the characters, as he openly pledges himself over and over again to those around him. So not only does his white garb represent his intentions, but also his regal status as a prince of the Holy Empire. And we can see this represented on various emblems on his design. And then his tabard extends down to his ankles and resembles the flowy wings of a dragon, mirroring those of Bahamut's. Just to go back to Bahamut a little bit, I feel like the sharply shaped pieces of armor on his pauldrons and the diamond pattern on the bottom of his tabard remind me of Bahamut's claws and talons. So this next part is not really related to Dion's design, but more of Bahamut's greater design. And I want to mention that Bahamut's tendrils and wings resemble that of the flower of the empire that Dion is often shown alongside. Overall, Dion's design is very closely tied to duty, service, and love, which are major story elements of 16. Next on our list is the dominant of the icon Garuda, Benedicta. So first of all, which I feel is very closely tied to the concept of Garuda and the icon of wind, is the fur around her collars and her shoulders that resemble feathers. Benedicta is wearing a very simple and sleek black bodysuit, but she has these really interesting shiny scale elements on her sleeves and the underside of her skirt cape. This makes me think of how many birds are attracted to metallic and shiny objects. This could be why they chose this element for her design or not, I'm not really sure, but that's what I thought about. For most of the story, Benedicta is unfortunately a very tragic and somewhat mysterious character, And I feel like the darkness of her outfit is representing her sadness and all the lies that she's told. She has basically not been truthful with any character in the game, including herself. She has a strained and strange relationship with a lot of the male characters like Barnabas, Clive, and Hugo. And I feel like the darkness of her outfit is just representing how much denial and all the hardships that she's experienced and how much denial she's experienced when it comes to being a dominant. So I feel like she doesn't openly express her connection with Garuda through her clothing as maybe some of the other characters might do more. Benedicta starts her life off being very poor and then becomes a slave, and then she encounters many people in her life whom with she feels she's been betrayed by or used, and she has kind of fallen into doing this herself by betraying and using people as a response. And I feel like her connection with herself is not that strong, and it's reflected in her design that could seem lacking in connection to her icon. After Benedicta, I feel like it would only be fitting to talk about the dominant of Titan, Hugo Kuka. I acknowledge that Hugo is the only character whose last name I included. I feel like this is just a necessary thing to do because the characters often refer to him as both Hugo and Kuka when that is not done with any other character. So I call him Hugo Kuka. Anyways, I think that Hugo's color palette really reflects the Dalmekian Republic's flag. There's a lot of purple, red, and gold in his outfit, and those are also colors often used throughout the flag's design. And Titan is also an icon that is commonly associated with earthy colors as well, so these reds and golds and beiges in his design feel very natural and kind of clay inspired. So the main eye-catching piece of Hugo's design is the lavish golden belt around his waist. And this really reflects his strength and security and shows that his core is his strength as he is a physical fighter. Now, while gold is a very strong material, it is actually the most malleable of all the precious metals. I think it's interesting how they chose to adorn Hugo's core and his finger rings in gold. I feel like this really represents how shapeable and even gullible he can be despite his overwhelming strength. And then the silvery purple of his top and trousers remind me of the color of shale rocks, which deepens his connection to the earth. Interestingly, similar to gold, shale is also soft and very brittle. It is easily eroded when exposed to weathering and stress. This is also quite pertinent to how Hugo is depicted throughout the story. Last, but certainly not least, is the dominant of Odin Barnabas. First off, I want to mention how Barnabas dresses incredibly more casual than any of the other characters. This is truly a representation of how he has basically already let himself go and let go of his free will. The drape of his black shirt is very laissez-faire and careless looking and just very blech. Whether he intended or not, Barnabas is very effortlessly chic. Barnabas has a very long and successful career as a fighter and leader, and he is shown to be very confident in his abilities, and I feel like this is partially reflected in how he dresses. Like, he's not trying to impress anybody, he doesn't have anything to prove anymore, he's just kind of living. Interestingly, I feel like Barnabas can be seen as a flip side to Clive. Both of the characters are mainly dressed in black with some hints of their own color, which is either red or blue, at the core of their design. Of course, the blue in his design obviously is connecting him to the Akashic and all of the evil doers in the realm, but I think it's also a representation of how his core beliefs and his heart is very barren and cold and empty now. Both Clive and Barnabas have lived very similar lives. They have lost those closest to them and experienced a lot of hardships, yet I feel like they reacted in different ways. Barnabas let his sadness consume him, while Clive never let his free will go. This is what makes them so similar, but in the end, what also set them apart. I had a lot of fun sitting down and looking at these designs for a really long time. While I was playing the game, I was just constantly staring at what everybody was wearing and just thinking about it and analyzing it and trying to connect it to the story. Compared to a lot of the other Final Fantasy games, the character designs in this game are a lot more grounded in reality and a bit more realistic and a little bit less fantasy. At first, you could think that that's kind of boring, that there's nothing to talk about, but actually, I gained a lot of respect for the character designs just because of how deeply intertwined I feel like the characters are to the story and the world that they're living in. I hope you enjoyed this little symbolic character design fashion analysis, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.